James Harden genuinely might be one of the greatest pioneers in NBA history. What's up, everybody? This is Coach Muhammad. I'm back with another video here with Hoop Symmetry, and today I was thinking about one player who I believe is very maligned and not given enough credit for all that they've done for the game of basketball. Now, everyone doesn't love everything that they've done for the game of basketball, but nonetheless, they've done a lot for the game of basketball in terms of skill development, in terms of the way the game is scouted, the way the game is played, what type of players are now at a premium. And that player is James Harden, even the rule book. So today we're going to break down some of his influences, and we're going to break it into three separate categories. The first two receiving the most attention. Without further ado, let's start.
Beverly watches Harden, two former teammates. Harden gets around him, fires a three, got it, and send him to the line. Draped.
So the first thing about James Harden that I want to talk about is the archetype of James Harden, which to me is very significant because James Harden is to me the founder or the pioneer or the exemplar for the modern heliocentric offensive systems. You know, before, let's take it back where there was Mike D'Antoni's 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns, where they would try to get out in transition, score really quickly, and had an offense centered around shooting threes and running ball screens and getting dunks.
Mike D'Antoni being an offensive mind that wasn't going to play two traditional bigs.
And they had a really efficient engineer of that system known as Steve Nash.
That's truly what set the table.
The greatness of Steve Nash is measured by how his ability to lead that offense. People assume you can just plug another point guard in and run that offense, and you cannot. So that shows you the greatness of Steve
Nash. So Steve Nash really carried a lot of the system, making every play, you know, having many seasons around 50, 40, 90, peak efficiency. And in those systems, one of the things Steve Nash was also very efficient in was his high ball screen offense. He was averaging over a point per possession for most seasons, always ranking in the 90th percentile or better at the top of the league while doing this. Now, Steve Nash ran the system very seamlessly, but they could never get quite over the hump because of many defensive limitations or anything like that, just like James Harden. But back around 2017, when Mike D'Antoni was added to the Houston Rockets, he unlocked another upgraded version of the Steve Nash offensive system in James Harden.
Be aggressive, but with an open mind to score, playmake when I was at my best. But the context is I grew up in an era where a point guard wasn't supposed to shoot 25 times or 20 times.
They basically took the 7 seconds or less offense that D'Antoni ran and added a 30-point per game scorer who was also clearly one of the best isolation players in the entire NBA, and that is James Harden. He was able to both make every pass that you can make coming off the ball screen, while also, again, making every scoring type of situation you can have in an isolation package. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the next chapter. But from this system, this has created the premium type of player every team wants on their team, which is the big guard, ball dominant scorer who can also make every pass on the floor. This is how you get your Lukas, your Shai, your Cade Cunninghams, your LaMelo Balls, etc. After teams saw the success of a James Harden-led offense, which took the Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant to 7 games and was winning in Game 7 without their second best player, Chris Paul, who got hurt, people started seeing the potential success. Even though he didn't get over the hump, the proof of concept was there. And James Harden was averaging some of the most threes, being very efficient by just shooting threes or getting to the hole, making every play, leading the league in assists multiple years. And that framework is how you get people valuing these type of players when they're scouting. He's the mold that all teams are now looking for when they're trying to scout players. Even players coming into the draft now, like Darren Peterson, a lot of people can see the concept coming from James Harden. Even if it's not the most perfect comparison, it's the fact that you have a now big playmaking guard. So you have the guy who can make the reads like a previous Steve Nash and run a heliocentric system, but also has more scoring chops and more physical tools to them so that they can't have as many weaknesses as Steve Nash had, always being a liability on defense and being able to be contained a little bit more with more big physical defenders in the scoring punch, because Steve Nash was never a very good isolation player. He was always kind of middle of the pack in terms of his isolation numbers. But when you have guys who can be in the same points per possession category or in the same ballpark of that as a Steve Nash, while also being one of the top players in isolation, which accounts for the modern defense of switching, because Steve Nash didn't face as many switches. And when you switch, the only way to beat that is by taking advantage of isolations and, at the very end of it. And so when you have a player who can do both of those things, you've now ratcheted that type of system up to another level.
Well, things aren't working offensively. Wants to go back to Paul George. That was taken away, but he got the switch. And he gets the layup up. They're only one. LeBron has a great choice words when how Lakers are playing.
He fires and hits.
The next thing, and probably the thing I want to spend the most time talking about that James Harden added to the league, is his innovations. James Harden is one of the best innovators, which is kind of what the title of the video is talking about. And I want to talk about some of these key innovations in specific detail so that we can see how he's transformed the game of basketball in front of our very eyes. So the first innovation I want to talk about is his signature size up. Iman Shumpert was talking about this recently about how repeatable this size up is. And if you're on 2K and you're choosing a dribble moves, there's a point which you say a signature size up move, or the way that you kind of get into your breakdown series. And James Harden is by far the most effective that I've ever seen.
James knows it, but his DNA of how he gets to his shit, that's what Luka does. The dribble shake show, tween cross.
But you know what? I didn't like that comparison ever, but the more and more I see from Luka is
people had the nerve to try and argue me on Twitter and say, "Oh man, you said James changed the game more than Steph and woo and la la la." And I said, "No, we just have to put them in the conversation together." Steph made it to where you have to shoot the three with his mouthpiece halfway out his fucking mouth. When you look at James, because Steph made it to where we all have to add this to our game. Mm-hmm. Cool. James Harden made it to where that's people's package. When I say a package, like, people be like, do he got game? There's a difference in you're good at basketball and you got game. But James made it to where now Anthony Edwards can go to this package at the end of a shot clock. Tween, cross, and now it sits you in a stance. You sitting now. You can't move. You have to sit. How good are your quads? For real though, because you've been sitting in a stance this whole time. If you jump a little bit, blow by. Anthony Edwards, dunk. You jump a little bit, blow by. Luka Dončić, you're on his hip now. You gonna make it 3 points now? Because now it's a 3-pointer in the lane. Because he gonna get the foul.
I was just about to say.
He's gonna make
foul.
it.
Yeah,
and he heavy.
Foul.
He gonna make it.
That's 4 with James Harden. That's what I said.
But it's like he designed this for them. Luka Dončić is nothing but James Harden with a right hand. Anthony Edwards is a hyper athletic version. Look at his dribble setup. Look at LaMelo Ball. Tell me what that is. People think it's so out of the ordinary. No, he just dribbles it a little higher. It's James Harden. Tween cross. The
method is the same. It's just like LaMelo is a little.
I usually also say James Harden is the most effective ball handler I think I've ever seen in my life. And I've been watching basketball for forever. I played basketball. Most effective doesn't mean necessarily the best ball handler. I would give that to Kyrie Irving, meaning he can do the most difficult things with the ball seamlessly, and he is also a very effective ball handler. But because James Harden at that size dribbles the way that he does, and his utilization of moves is so efficient. People talk about him dribbling all the time, but a lot of times his dribbles are very efficient in terms of getting to where he needs to go. And the thing that sets up all this whole dribble series is his signature size up.
The repetition in Harden's game. He's constantly moving, and he never leaves the defender time to relax unless it's calculated that way. Many times this gets his defender moving in place until he sees him in a position that he wants to attack. Just watch how much Harden has his defender moving here, simply off repeating that one move. Perfect example right here. He gets Turner moving backwards with that repetition, and now he's at his mercy. He sets up almost every ISO possession with that signature combo of crosses in between the legs, which actually throws defenders off because of how simple it is. He can do it fast, he can do it slow, he can hezzy, or he can go by. It really leaves so many options. and this keeps the defender on their heels. They just never know what's coming. But it's key that this whole time he's reading their feet.
One of the advantages of James Harden's signature size up is that he starts from a front-loaded position. You'll watch a lot of people when their signature size up, they're at a squared up position. So if you watch Kevin Durant, it's rocking side to side with the ball, boom, dribble, dribble. A lot of people are this way with the ball. Their shoulders are squared to the goal. But when you have a front-loaded position, which your foot is forward and you're attacking from that angle, it makes it much harder to stop because the hesiant go, like if you're dribble, boom, 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 and you're already here, you can just kind of go at any point in time, which makes it very hard to stop. And when you watch it, why I say he's the most effective ball handler is because usually the signs of a great ball handler is being able to get anywhere that they want on the floor effortlessly. And usually how you accomplish that is by getting your shoulders past the other defender. Well, James Harden takes his size up to another level. He doesn't just get his shoulders past. He literally leaves some of the greatest defenders of NBA history in the dust just standing feet behind him. Like he'll have his whole body past him. It got so bad where people even had to guard him like with two people backwards and stuff like that because they just literally could not stay in front of him. Like I watched Andre Iguodala get left in the dust by James Harden multiple times, and that almost never happens. Even with defenders as good as Kyrie, they'll still get past him by getting their shoulder pass and getting an advantage in that way. But James Harden literally will leave people standing there. It's because of that front-loaded nature of the position. The other thing that makes him so effective, and the next part that I want to talk about, is his shuffle step back three. Nowadays, you know, it's commonplace, but he was one of the first people who had that step back three that was a staple in his game in terms of a high volume in scoring, which is why he was always at the top of the league in three-pointers made, and they were difficult shots. And then he also added the little innovation which people used to call a travel when he was coming out with it, but now everyone does it, and it's a little shuffle step. It's, you know, the interpretation of the gather dribble, really making people rethink the way that they're looking at that. And it complements his game because of that front-loaded position and the fact that he's lefty. A lot of lefty shooters also start with their feet in this kind of sideways tilted position, which is kind of similar to the way that he's, you know, isolating in this kind of sideways front-loaded position in his size up, so they kind of complement each other perfectly, which also makes him very difficult to guard. Another thing that he does amazingly is the low gather. So we've seen certain guys like Manu Ginobili and other players use this in the past sparingly, but never as a staple, a part of their game, and it's so brilliant the way that he does it. You know, there's many different ways to gather the ball when you're moving and progressing to the goal. You know, how you pick the ball up is almost just as important as you actually getting there, and that's how you maneuver through traffic. You know, there's the Dwayne Wade pickup. I used to love that when you go over the head. There's the D Rose, you know, you cuff the ball like a football type of thing. And there's many other ways to kind of try to keep the ball away from the defenders. But the low pickup to the sweep, which James Harden used to draw a lot of fouls, people call that foul baiting, but it really was just genius because they were actually fouling him. You can't blame a guy for holding the ball out and guys being undisciplined and swiping at their arm and them taking advantage of that. That's simply just high IQ basketball. And when you combine it with the fact that he's able to get past anyone so easy and then step back and make those shots so efficiently, it really creates a nightmare for people. And it literally has now become a staple of most basketball players when they're playing. If you watch AJ DeBanza or many players who are coming up now, they utilize this as a staple in their game to get to the goal and get to where they need to go. Luka, LaMelo, etc. But, you know, the person who kind of made that a norm was James Harden. I don't think he's getting enough credit for that type of thing. Nowadays, we're also seeing the one-legged three make a return. You know, I showed a video of Steph Curry shooting one, you know, just because he was at the end of the shot clock. But you also watch guys like LaMelo shoot it. But James Harden once debuted this as kind of like his new innovative move.
Oh, there it is. There it is, the new move by James Harden. And here it is. On the sideline right there, a one-legged.
And people took this and started thinking, well, maybe this can be a real thing. You can see Victor Wembanyama shoot it. And sometimes I think people overblow the one-legged nature of things. They used to do that same thing with Dirk's fadeaway, thinking that it's like some type of circus trick. But a lot of times it's just a balance thing. You know, a lot of people who understand basketball understand shooting off the dribble a lot of times comes with footwork and how well your balance is set up. And sometimes it's easier when you're transitioning from one, when you're moving and dribbling, to transition from one phase to another while staying on one foot versus having to get that other foot down, establish it, and then regain your balance. Sometimes you're already more balanced just off of one. It's like being a 1 foot jumper or a 2 foot jumper. So in a way, James Harden showed that, and he hasn't really made it too much of a staple of his game, but just the innovation to think of that. And I do think at some point they're gonna have people who really make that a huge part of their game, other than just like LaMelo shooting it sporadically here and there. Another thing that he kind of made key was this lob floater that looks identical. Because he's getting downhill so easy, because he's a pick and roll maestro, the lob to Capella, which could also be a floater that looks exactly the same, that's now a routine play of every league guard, like Trae Young. If you watch Luka, all these type of guys, they do this play where you're holding that low defender in place because they're always fearful of the drop off, and you just shoot the floater, but it looks just like the lob. And that is the key, not the fact that he's the first person to float the ball instead of lobbing the ball. That's kind of a regular play for people who run the pick and roll. But the way he did it, routinely, has now evolved the game into just a staple of how people operate whenever they're the lead ball handler. And I really think that people should give him more respect for those type of things. There are so many innovations that James Harden's made to the game of basketball, changing the rules, etc., that I feel like people really need to look into, because regardless of him not winning a championship, he definitely is one of the most iconic innovators in terms of basketball skill development. A lot of guys have taken things from James Harden, whether they realize it or not. A lot of your favorite players take things from James Harden. And the last one is James Harden, the icon, man. Like, I think his playoff record is overblown. When people talk about him never winning or that he's a playoff choker, I would like to remind people, and I remind them all the time, he took the Kevin Durant Warriors to 7 games and was winning in that game, the team that most people agree is the best team of all time, to 7 games. And that same team went on to sweep LeBron and Kyrie in them. I can't remember if that year they swept them or beat them in 5, but both years, they got rid of them pretty easily. So James Harden was taking his team to 7 games, almost beating them in that game. And we got a lot of favorable calls in that game. I'm a Golden State fan, so I rock with Golden State, but that game 7 was a little iffy in terms of the officiating just to win, and them missing 27 straight threes. So I really don't think it's too much of a crime to lose to a team like that. It's not like, people call John Stockton all the time a choker for constantly losing to Michael Jordan. But a team that most people consider better than that Bulls team, or at least in the same tier as that Bulls team, if you were an old head and you want to just argue with them, then yeah, like, I don't think that's too bad. He was beating everyone else, and he was constantly getting his team advanced in the playoffs. So it's not like he was like Tracy McGrady not winning playoff series at all or anything like that. So I think that's a little overblown. And then, the other iconic things James Harden has done as far as player movement, the fashionable sense, whether we like the fashion or not. I'm not really a fashion guy, so the outfits he wears look ridiculous to me, but it's really not about that. It's about the fact that it is innovative. And so some people can think it's positive or negative, but you got to start paying your respects to the living legends among us. And James Harden, to me, is one of those. His contributions to basketball, to me, will never be overstated. And I just wanted to remind people of that, because my whole thing is bringing balance to the game as far as the conversations go of basketball. And I feel like James Harden receives way too much hate for what he actually is and what he's actually meant to the development of the game of basketball, as we see. So anyway, that's all I have for today. This is Coach Muhammad with Hoop Symmetry, and I am out.